Welcome back to Pivot Points and to the second episode in our Nordic takeover. I'm your host for this special run of episodes. My name is Will Basanko, CEO of Brandpai in the EMEA region. The Nordic region is rethinking healthcare, cementing its standing as the gold standard. It's more digital, more connected, closer to the patient. Thor Medical is a pivotal player in the story that's being written. They're world leaders in using alpha emitters for cancer therapy. In other words, their innovation stands at the forefront of a world in which healthcare systems are under greater pressure than ever before. The traits that see them leading from the front are pretty uniquely Nordic. And joining us this week to share how that shapes the business in the region is Thor Medical's CEO, Jasper Kurth. Jasper, welcome to this second episode in our Nordic takeover of Pivot Points.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Will. Pleasure.
Very good to have you. And this is the second in our series with Nordic leaders as part of our Pivot Points Nordic takeover. Last time we spoke with Steinar Sundsteby of Atea. And today, of course, we speak with yourself, Jasper. And very, very intrigued to talk to you, of course, about yourself and your background, but also the business that you lead, Thor Medical, which I have to say, I couldn't think of a more fascinating business. I've been reading up on it and pretending to get smart, ready for this conversation, but have a heck of a lot to learn from you in this discussion.
Yeah, let's find out, shall we?
No exams, please. Yeah. So Why don't we start there? Hey, for our listeners who might not be familiar with Thor Medical and the business and what you do, let's open with that. That would be a great place to start.
Yeah, so Thor Medical plays an important role in this industry that is undergoing this very dramatic shift in oncology. So, I mean, for decades, if not 1 century, patients with cancer have been treated with radiation. So radiation is next to surgery, one of the known modalities to actually have a curative element to cancer treatment. So there is a long tradition in treating cancer with radiation from the outside. It's very effective. And for a couple of decades, there are very crude ways of treating cancer from the inside. So you actually inject isotopes, so radioactive substances that bind naturally to the bone marrow, for instance, or to bone cells, to the thyroid to actually treat thyroid cancer. So it's a very effective way of treating some cancers that basically uses the way some isotopes like radium mimics, for instance, calcium that then binds to the bone cells. And this is very nice, and it works fantastic. And actually, Norway has a role to play here because it was the pioneer of the first alpha-emitting treatment, and we'll come to that in a bit, that was invented here to treat bone metastases in prostate cancer patients. But the limiting factor for these crude drugs is that they are not targeting other cancers. And the disruption that I was speaking about in the beginning is that now these isotopes are combined with target-seeking molecules. Think of a cruise missile with a radioactive warhead. That's kind of what these are. So you inject these drugs into patients, and they circulate the bloodstream, and they bind to the specific surfaces of cancer cells, tumors, metastases, and then they deploy the radioactive payload and effectively killing those cancer cells. And this is exactly where Thor Medical comes in. So we are focusing on the isotope, and we believe that alpha-emitting isotopes are the future because alpha-emitting isotopes convey a higher payload. So the kinetic energy that is transferred from the isotope to the cancer cell is much higher to those currently marketed beta-emitting isotopes. And we can basically kill a cancer cell with a single alpha emission. And alpha radiation is also safer because you can protect yourself from alpha radiation with just a sheet of paper, and the distance traveled is very short. So you have a precision medicine at your hand where you treat the cancer cells, the tumors, the metastases, but you leave the healthy tissue intact. And this is what makes it so cool and actually what brings hope to millions of patients and their families. And here in Norway, we have developed this process to actually create these isotopes from naturally occurring resources. So byproducts from the mining industry we take into our plant, and we purify them enough to actually be able to inject them into patients. And that is absolutely fantastic and fascinating to me. So I would completely relate to what you said. It is amazing to be a part of this.
And how did you get here, Jasper, to this role? I mean, what a fascinating business, but so medically advanced. And I know your background's at Bayer, isn't it? So I'm assuming this has just been a career trajectory in terms of gaining so much expertise and passion for this industry.
I mean, the boring answer is I got poached. Uh, so I was working for Bayer. Had a time of my life. I was running the Nordics, actually for one of the divisions in healthcare, and I was about to move on to Reading, close to London, believe it or not. So that was my new gig, and I already accepted that. And then I was approached by the board of directors of Thor Medical, a listed company, and they had this proposition to become a CEO of this company, and I was seriously considering that. And then I met the CEO of the company of that time, and that is a celebrity here in Norway called Alt Bjørseth. He is a serial entrepreneur, has founded $1 billion companies on the Oslo Stock Exchange. And he spoke to me, and it was, for me, a pivotal moment because he told me, you have the chance of being part of this, where we actually unlock a new generation of cancer treatments with what we actually do here with this process. And this actually got me convinced that this is what I need to do. So I remember, like it was yesterday, Valentine's Day 2024, I looked for an excuse to travel to Berlin to see my boss in Bayer. And I had to deliver the message that I resigned from the company and I will not be moving to Reading, and they have to find someone else. And while this felt incredibly hard, and I miss my colleagues still today, and Bayer is a fantastic company, a great place to work, I have not looked back because what I do, I truly enjoy. We build something, we have a very important purpose, and I strongly believe that this is necessary to help millions of patients and their families.
I mean, the opportunity for impact in the role you're doing now and the advancement in the technology is pretty phenomenal, I would assume. And you mentioned the term pivotal moment. It's a phrase that we love here at Brampai. We talk a lot about pivotal moments, and many are perceiving right now that it's a bit of a pivotal moment for the Nordics, and that the Nordics itself is actually at a bit of an inflection point. And I'd love your take on exactly that, you know, leading a business that is doing such technologically advanced work, but those around you, the businesses within the sector and within the region, do you see this as a moment for the Nordics to take center stage when it comes to some of the advancements in not just healthcare, but technology, energy, etc.?
What is very special in the Nordics is that you have a high trust in government institutions, and there's a glue in society that people take care of one another. And I have not experienced this in many other places. And I think this helps to create ecosystems and partnerships and collaboration on a next level scale. And then you pair it with very transparent business conduct, so very little corruption in these markets that actually help to build trust between companies, and also companies and patients, and companies and consumers more broadly speaking. And I see this also in pharmaceuticals, and Norway maybe in particular, where we're looking at a radiopharmaceutical ecosystem in the making here in the greater Oslo area. So my company, Thor Medical, and also some others, we are standing on shoulders of giants. Bayer purchased Algeta, used to be a small startup here, and they have developed this drug that I was referring to before, called Sofigo, where you treat bone metastases with injecting radium into the patient. So this actually is a good example of innovation that is being generated by society and by the system here in Norway. And we have great talents coming from fantastic universities here in Oslo and also in other parts of the country that actually help to drive these ideas forward. And we have hired successfully key positions both in our headquarters here in Oslo, as well as in our plant where we have R&D labs and where we have production, which is 2 hours south of Oslo in a nice place called Porsgrunn, Herøya. So getting talent is very, very important, and getting talent that has been exposed to the industry is absolutely pivotal. And we've been able to do that. So I think Norway and the Nordics are at that inflection point, especially when it comes to a world that is turning a bit more to the dark side, if I may, in terms of intransparent business conduct and corruption. I think this is destroying innovation. It is destroying wealth, and it's destroying the well-being of people. And I think the Nordics can be a beacon of hope that success can be generated by playing fair and by building trust and partnerships that actually mean partnership.
Yeah, leaning into what feels I suppose, innately Nordic as well. Some of the traits you mentioned there certainly represent many of the leaders I know and have been lucky to work with in the region. It also makes me think as well about another term that is often used within the context of Nordic businesses, which is resilience. There is this concept and notion of endurance and stability and resilience within the region. How has the geopolitical instability that you referenced there, how has that shaped how you're thinking about resilience as a leader and the way you're navigating that for Thor Medical?
Yeah, I truly believe resilience is one of the key traits that you want to not only have in leaders, but also in everybody around you, your employees, your partners, because there will be headwind at one point, and in any business. And while we have been blessed with a very successful track record over the part I have been with the company, like for instance, last week on Friday, we announced to the market that we closed Mechanical Complete, which is a huge milestone for our flagship operations and plant Alpha One. Then, of course, it's important that we deliver on target, but there are always risks when you run a business like this and where you deal with complex environments and globally interconnected markets. So being resilient actually means being successful in the long run. And I think some companies and organizations are focused on short-term gains. And what I mentioned in partnership is also being able to look beyond the issue at hand and rather feel, what does it mean maybe the day after tomorrow, maybe next year, maybe in 10 years down the line. So what does it mean to actually build something greater than just individuals or single organizations, and rather look at what the impact is on society and on the economy as such, and maybe not just the single sector we're playing in.
Yeah, it's such a big part of resilience as well as that long-term thinking, isn't it? How do you do that? What advice would you give to fellow leaders who, the short-term pressures just feel constant, don't they? And instability geopolitically only adds to that. What guides you through that and enables you to take a more long-term perspective?
I think most important is to stick to a clear and unambiguous vision of what you want to achieve and what is the part that you have to play in it, not as an organization, but each and everyone individually. So what is the value add that everybody brings to the table, and what is the status today, and how can we actually develop it with what we do every day into the future? So it is not always as simple as selling our story, because if I talk to our employees, I oftentimes use just medical images. So you see one cancer patient and you see the PET-CT scan, so where you basically put a radioactive tracer, and these tracers stick to the cancer, and you see a lot of black spots, which are the tumors and metastases, and can actually tell that this is a very sick patient that has a family and maybe has kids and is needed by a lot of people. And then you see a drug is applied using our isotopes, and you see the same patient without any black spots on the scan. And this is the perfect example of showing long-term thinking, because when you are in the pharmaceutical industry, these drugs, they are not developed overnight and they will not go to the hospital next day. So you have to have that long-term view on investing into an early project and see this project go through the clinical development phases, and then eventually after being tested thoroughly in animals and in patients and actually patients that suffer from cancer, you see the result. And the result is that you save lives. And I think this can be very, very, very big, but it's not always that simple. So you have to find the way that resonates with people, what the purpose actually means long term, besides all the short term issues and hurdles you have to overcome. But what if we are successful? What is the status then? And how is it different from today?
Yeah, and the impact on the individual, I think. You mentioned there that image, you're showing direct impact of the work that you're doing. And we talked about the Nordics, I suppose, as a region a little bit earlier. One thing that is clear in the press at the moment is that the Nordic healthcare system is under increasing pressure and will only be increasing more so in the future, as with many healthcare systems globally. How do you think about the impact on the region more broadly and the role that you're playing within that healthcare landscape for the Nordics?
I think what we can do to help making also the healthcare sector more present, especially in Norway. I mean, there is sizable healthcare industry in other Nordic countries, in Denmark, of course, with Novo Nordisk, and in Sweden, we have also a lot of huge players. In Norway, not so much. So we are a company that is, some consider us still a startup, even though we are scaling, and we are, I think, the leading supplier for these alpha-emitting isotopes globally. But we are one of the largest companies on the Oslo Stock Exchange in terms of market cap, even though I still feel we are a very small company. So this tells you a bit about the healthcare industry or the life science industry in Norway. So our contribution to this is making sure that politicians and decision makers and the general public understands what it means to have a local industry to speak of in pharmaceuticals, that it's important to also support it, because countries like Norway have seen the pharmaceutical industry rather as someone that is benefiting from people that are sick and cost a lot of money. And I think we have to change that, because the contributions of products and drugs that actually alleviate severe sicknesses and help people to get better, in some cases even cure severe diseases, the relevance and the societal impact we need to explain better. Because when we talk about pharmaceuticals, we talk about price, but it's way more than that. And we need to put this price into the context of what we actually achieve. And we talk about patients oftentimes that are not 89 years old and basically are in retirement age. We're talking about patients that are in the middle of their life, and they have a role to play for their family. They have a role to play in society. They have a role to play in the Norwegian economy, and helping those patients and curing those patients actually not only has an emotional value, it has a value that can be measured in dollars and cents. Because the patient, when cured or when significantly helped, can return to the workplace or can return to the family, can raise their children. And we need to look from that angle on the pharmaceutical industry and how we can support them. And this also plays into this whole discussion about the US paying too much for pharmaceuticals, and this whole most favored nation discussion that we have observed in the past. And my maybe unpopular opinion is that we all have to pay more for the healthcare that we actually receive, because we are an aging population. We are longer in retirement, and this costs a lot of money. And we need to maybe rethink the way we think about pharmaceuticals and healthcare in particular.
Mm. And in order to do that, I imagine it takes a heck of a lot of trust, right, within the broader population. You spoke about it just a moment ago. The perception among so many different stakeholders, but society at large, around the pharmaceutical industry and the work that's being done. The Nordics is such an intriguing region in that it's such a high trust business environment. We talk about trust all the time. How does that play out for you in Thor Medical? You know, building trust must be integral to, in many ways, your license to operate, I'd imagine. But how do you go about building trust in such a unique and complex business in many ways?
Yeah, that's a great question, Will. So trust is actually the currency that we work with, not only because we deal with radioactive materials, but because I think trust actually causes great ideas to materialize and actually be successful. Trust with employees, but also trust with partners. And in our case, it starts with, and always actually starts with walking the talk. Coming up with an idea, communicating, and tell a compelling story, and then follow up on the story and actually do what you say. And I think when I look at companies and also people that are visible in the public eye, I think there's a tendency that people try to please everybody. And when you have strong values in the core of what you do, sometimes you have to irritate people. Because when you stand for something, it means that not everybody agrees with you. And I don't see this too often these days from leaders in politics and leaders in organizations in general. So I think this is where you can separate yourself. And I think this, in the long run, also attract talent, because people want to mean something and they want to be part of something that stands for something. And as I said, sometimes, excuse my French, you have to piss people off in order to matter.
You know, it's a really, really good point. We often say that in order to know what you stand for, you have to know what you don't stand for, what you stand against.
Exactly. And draw a line in the sand.
Exactly. That probably, though, feels quite alien to the region from what you've described and the environment. How do you find that playing out in the local context?
It's funny. I mean, as a German, and maybe I should have shared that before, I'm a foreigner to this country, as you might know, but I moved my family from Berlin to Stockholm first, and that was before the pandemic. And then basically I've been living in Scandinavia for the last 6 years, a little more than that. So I can actually offer my unbiased opinion, hopefully. But the Nordics as such is not a single environment. I'm stating the obvious here, but there's a lot of perception also in larger European countries that is very similar to one another. But if I do business in Copenhagen or do business in Oulu, Finland, that's a vast difference between these two. And there are more nuances to this. And yes, it's true. Many Nordic countries are consensus driven, Sweden even more so than Norway, but you get also direct feedback, unlike hierarchy driven organizations or cultures like the German or the British office culture. So get a lot of feedback from my team, and people speak up when they don't feel it's going in the right direction. And I think this helps to build that trust and actually to exchange on things that are not going right. And for me, I personally thrive in this environment where I get that feedback and I can discuss more openly.
And part of that too is so important for how you're building your culture at Thor Medical, isn't it? And why don't we talk a little bit about your approach to building the culture and how you're attracting talent to the business in what I assume is a very competitive environment?
Yeah, it is. And I think what really matters to new hires or potential new hires that we want to get into the organization is, of course, a compensation package. I mean, everybody has that, and it has to be competitive. That's clear. But beyond that, I think what sometimes is underestimated how important values are, and what I mentioned before, that you as an organization stand for something. I mean, this is how you make consumer choices when you buy stuff. You buy a car because you like the car, but also you want to send a certain message to yourself and others why you chose that exact brand or model. And this goes for the same reason with potential employers. You go out and you want to be associated with an organization, and you want to be proud of working with certain people, with a certain mission, with a certain company. And I think we can use much more when it comes to employer branding and making sure that we communicate more openly the values that we stand for. And in my experience, this has mattered a lot when we hire people, because I personally have been asked, what do you actually stand for in this company? What does it mean when you say integrity as part of your values? So how do you live by this, and how do you make sure that the organization lives by this? And I think that is something that should be done more in this industry, but also in the economy in general.
And this is a sector too that depends on such highly skilled talent. You know, the competitive environment is only increasing for such talented folks. What do you think organizations should do in order to attract and retain the best talent? You know, is it a little bit about knowing what you stand for and what you stand against? That distinctive position you mentioned earlier, is that really important as well for a talent context?
That is a very important part. And I think this is good to attract talent, but retaining talent sometimes is even harder than attracting talent. You need to provide an environment, because people that are sought after and are very capable are those that are most mobile, and they would jump ship immediately if they feel not challenged, if they feel not welcome, if they feel they have an issue, because they have opportunities to go elsewhere. And that is, I think, an issue of every organization. If you have high performers, you need to find a way of retaining these talents. And it starts with providing the purpose and the values stand for, as you say, but you need to provide that environment that they can be themselves and to actually bring forward the ideas that make them special. And my job as CEO of Thor Medical is not to tell people how to do their stuff and how to run the business. I frankly would not be qualified to do that, because I only know so much about radiation physics and other things that are important. my job is to provide an environment where people can be themselves and where people come to work on a Monday morning saying, yes, it's great to be here because people appreciate me for what I am and I can be myself in this organization. And for me, this is a bit of diversity also. We don't talk about, don't get me wrong, wheelchairs and different aspects you can visibly see. It's about diversity of thought and that everybody is respected and appreciated just the way they are, because I strongly believe only when people feel that psychological safety, that they can speak up and come up with ideas or challenge ideas without being talking down, it's the best environment to be innovative and to actually bring ideas forward.
And what does that look like in practice? So, it's one thing to have that intention as a leader to create that environment. How do you actually do it for your people? What does that look like at Thor Medical?
I mean, that's the difficult part. You have to put it into the company's DNA and you start from the top. You need to start measuring your leaders, how they live up to these values and how do they actually describe in the performance evaluation how they have lived up to being accountable or making sure their leaders are accountable for what they do and that not all decisions have to pass their desk. So the best organization is run by people taking decisions at the lowest possible level in the organization. But this takes guts from leaders to actually let go of something that they are accountable for, but cannot be responsible for because they are not the best people to take that decision. So that switch and that mindset is difficult to attain, but it takes steering from the top. I strongly believe in low-level decision, but you need to provide that framework from the top and make sure that people don't see it as some fuzzy buzzwords coming from corporate, but rather something that is the operating system of this company, and that the words that are communicated are meant in that way.
Mm. And that operating system, you mentioned earlier, the culture of innovation that you're building in the business and how important innovation, of course, is to Thor Medical and what you do. So too is it about, I assume, being comfortable with disruption and building an environment culturally that is adaptive and adaptable to many of the changes in the sector and new advancements. I mean, I can only imagine the impact that AI and technological advancements is having on the medical sector at large. How is that shaping the way you build your culture at Thor Medical and your approach to leadership as well?
That's a great question. And my initial take is you need to make sure that you have that flexibility in your organization and your mindset that you can adapt to new trends in the market. And for us in particular, this industry is in its nascency. So there is no drug currently marketed using the isotopes that we produce and where we have created this process here. So this is all in the making. And there are different players out there and the market will find itself at one point, but there will be consolidation and there will be a different need for maybe a different product that we are currently not thinking of, but we need to be at the forefront, having our ear to the rail, so to say, to understand what's going to happen in the future and how much can we anticipate that. And this is where you need to have people that are willing and are feeling safe to share an idea that might sound dumb to their ears, but they share it anyway because they feel they are not reprimanded against when they do so. And I think this is absolutely mission critical for any company to provide that environment that wants to be ahead of the curve. And I strongly believe that is absolutely necessary for a company in our stage.
How do you feel about change and the need for adaptability to change just as a leader?
I mean, everybody says,
sorry, not easy.
No, it's not easy. And I have to start very corny. Change is the only constant. I think that we have all heard that before, but it's so true. And some people tell you that they like change and they embrace change. I think everybody is a bit afraid of change, including me, especially when things are going great. You don't want to lose what you feel is good. So you need to be convinced. And I think we have to show that empathy as leaders, that not everybody is on the same page and has the same access to information or the same way of thinking. So this is part of running a diverse organization, especially when you try to emphasize on psychological safety, that you are mindful of taking people on board and have enough time to reflect and also to talk to everybody involved to see that there is benefit in change either way. And I think this is very, very important. And this goes back to the two main characteristics of true leadership, that is listening actively and showing empathy and compassion. And I think this is very important to navigate change.
Totally agree. And there's somewhere there is always opportunity in change as well, isn't there? And in any form of challenge. Do you see, you've got a really unique perspective having worked across Europe. Do you see the Nordics as a region leaning in to change at the moment? Do you think that there is potential advantage for the Nordics in such a changing environment?
I think so, yes. I mean, the Nordics have one thing in common, and I can speak mainly for Sweden and Norway, two countries I've been living in for a long time. People focus also on work-life balance in a good way. So some people from mainland Europe think these Nordic guys, they don't work so long and they have rush hour starting at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. What are they doing? I can testify that productivity during these working hours is absolutely stellar, because people commit to a goal and then they are part of it. So being included in that discussion is absolutely important, and it helps to create a lot of buy-in, and then you move forward. And I think the Nordics play a forefront when it comes to that, and they are more leaning into change because they feel that they are part of the system that actually is driving change. And then pair this with a welfare state that actually cares for you, even in that case that you might lose your position. And I think this creates a lot of, this goes back to the trust in entities and society, but it helps also to stay a bit cooler when it comes to change, comparing to other countries where there is no such strong net in the society that you lose your job and you're basically dependent on the welfare state for a couple of months. And I think this helps many Nordic societies to be a bit more cooler when it comes to change, and to some extent even embracing change. This is just my 2 cents view on this.
Yeah, fascinating. And that work-life balance, certainly, but it builds a positive sense of culture and momentum as well, doesn't it? Around commitment to work, but commitment to having a positive impact as well for those around you. That's certainly a balance that I've observed and that you've, I think, articulated really well there. If we fast forward, so, 5-10 years from now, and Norway continues to lean into change, and you're leading a business that is at the cutting edge of innovation in your sector, what do you think success looks like for the Nordics? Where would you want to see the Nordics 5 years from now on the global stage?
Yeah, I hope that in 5 to 10 years' time, we will see, speaking from the healthcare industry standpoint here, obviously, so we will see many more clinical trials being done in the Nordics, and actually making use of the vast resources we have in these very digital countries, in terms of cancer registers, for instance, where you have data of cancer patients dating back to the 50s, where you can actually conclude a lot of aspects of treating cancer or other diseases for that matter using AI, for instance. So you see exactly what kind of diagnosis these patients had and what kind of drugs they have been given, and then you can see the outcome of the treatment. So using that trove of data as a resource, I think, would be fantastic also for clinical development. So that's one thing. The other thing is that governments would embrace large companies to be headquartered in the Nordics in general, but in particular in Norway. And they would create the right framework around this, that, for instance, illiquid capital is not taxed extensively as it is today, because I think this is separating Norway from Sweden, which has a much more successful capital market and attracts more companies in that sector. So I hope there is also some policy change that would make this successful, because I think the Norwegian economy would really benefit not only from having great ideas, as there had been in the past that have been scooped up by large companies, but rather having a Novo Nordisk in Oslo, for instance, a large global scale company that is leading in its respective markets. And I think that's something that I would dream of. Maybe not in the next 5 to 10 years, but maybe in 20 to 30 years that this is happening. And I think the radiopharmaceutical sector could be something of a change and a chance at the same time for Norway, because I strongly believe every large pharmaceutical company will have a huge portfolio where they treat cancer with radiation, because this is a very effective way of doing that. So this radioligand therapies, as they are called, these targeting-seeking molecules with a radioactive payload, I think every pharmaceutical company needs that. And there is a lot of innovation happening here in Norway. And this is the chance of Norway to be a relevant player in life science globally going forward.
Well, I think that's a wonderful sentiment and an ambition, let's frame it as, to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you and learning more about the fascinating business that you're running, but also your ambitions for the future. So thanks for joining us on Pivot Points.
Likewise, Will. What a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Pivot Points. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find more fascinating conversations with industry leaders in our previous episodes and our former episodes as part of this Nordic Takeover series. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to know more about Brand Pi and how we deliver impact in the pivotal moments that matter to you, head over to brandpi.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.